Many people believe that to be attractive, you have to stand out. You need to speak more, do more, show more. But the truth is the opposite. The most magnetic people are often the ones who speak the least. They walk into a room and don't need to do anything special, yet all eyes naturally turn to them. Not because they're seeking attention, but because they carry an energy that makes others instinctively pause, take notice, and feel something. That is quiet magnetism, the kind that earns you respect before you even say a word. This kind of presence doesn't come from fancy clothes, a good-looking face, or a calculated posture, and it certainly doesn't come from behavior aimed at proving your worth. It comes from the stillness within you, a stillness that isn't emptiness but full presence. A person with quiet magnetism doesn't try to convince anyone of their importance. Their very being commands attention, and the paradox is this: the harder you try to impress, the more invisible you become. But when you release the need for validation, you become someone others can't take their eyes off. I've observed this not only in famous people, but in ordinary individuals in daily life. Some walk into a coffee shop, no one knows who they are, yet you can feel it clearly. This person carries weight, not because they speak loudly. They just sit there, calm, composed, and everything around them seems to adjust its pace in response to their presence. That's inner power. And the fascinating part is you can absolutely cultivate that kind of magnetism if you're willing to turn inward and begin living like someone who no longer needs the world's confirmation to feel worthy. Quiet magnetism isn't a social skill. It's the result of a long-term inner development. It comes when you no longer need to be the center of attention, but simply remain steady in a chaotic room. When everyone else is rushing to speak, you listen. When others react, you observe. When people scramble to prove something, you stay grounded and let your actions speak. True attractiveness doesn't lie in what you say, it lies in how others feel when they're near you. A person with quiet magnetism makes others feel safe, heard, as if something deep is unfolding, even if they can't name it. And because they can't define it, they are drawn in. It's an appeal that doesn't come from image, but from depth. Not from your appearance, but from your energy. Not from how you perform, but from the feeling others receive when you are present. Here's what matters. You can't fake this kind of presence. It doesn't come from memorized quotes or clever lines. It comes from how you truly look at others, how you breathe, how you remain silent while everyone else scrambles to interrupt, how you walk a little slower, not because you're weak, but because you're not in a rush. Every small action tells the world you're not ruled by appearances. You live from the inside out, and the world will always respect someone like that, naturally. Remember, in a society where everyone is trying to speak louder, the silent one becomes the strongest voice. When you no longer need to shout, when you don't need approval, when you don't crave applause, you become dangerous. Because others cannot manipulate you with praise or criticism. They clearly sense you're okay even when no one notices you. And that is one of the purest forms of personal power. You don't have to disappear or be cold to possess quiet magnetism. On the contrary, the more authentic you are, the more connected you are to the best version of yourself, the more fully you show up. People with quiet magnetism don't avoid society. They simply don't let society define their value. They're not isolated. They just know when to speak and when to hold their silence. And because they don't talk all the time, when they do, people listen. Quiet magnetism begins when you no longer seek to impress others, but instead focus on living with consistency, depth, and honesty. You nurture your personal integrity, not because someone's watching, but because you respect yourself. You act with kindness, not to be called a good person, but because you simply can't live otherwise. You don't compete to outshine anyone because you know your path isn't a race. And then, as you live this way, every step, every glance, every move you make starts to express an undeniable presence. No need to raise your voice, no need to fight for the spotlight. And yet those who observe you will begin to question themselves. If you're looking for a way to become more attractive, start with silence. Not silence because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer need words to prove your worth. Observe how you enter a room. Do you rush to draw attention? Or can you stand still and let your presence naturally expand? Try sitting through a conversation where you simply listen, observe, and choose the right moment to say something brief but deep. You'll find yourself standing out, not because you're trying to be magnetic, but because you've become steady enough that you no longer need to try. Quiet magnetism isn't something you learn in a day, but it is something you can begin cultivating today by observing yourself more, by pausing slightly before reacting, by choosing stability over drama. And each day, as you practice living from your inner strength, the world will begin to acknowledge your presence, not with applause, but with quiet respect. And that is worth more than any noise. There's a simple truth that few dare to accept. If you need others to validate you, then you are not truly strong. Not because validation is wrong, but because when you depend on it, you hand over the authority of your life to someone else. In a world where everyone craves attention, the person who lives independently becomes a rare exception, and for that very reason, they always stand out, even though they never demand to be noticed. Independence doesn't need to be loud. It is the strongest declaration you can make to the world. I am whole, even when I'm only with myself. An independent person is not closed off or cold. They don't act indifferent. On the contrary, they are deeply connected but not attached. They cherish relationships, yet they don't define their worth through the presence or absence of anyone. They can listen, share, walk alongside others while still maintaining a healthy boundary between me and the other. And that is why they possess a distinct magnetism, because within them is a wholeness that others can feel but can never possess. I've met people with whom just a few minutes of conversation are enough to know they don't need to be convinced of who they are. They don't boast about what they know. They don't belittle anyone. They simply show up clear, grounded, unmoved by how others judge them. You feel it instantly and you respect them. Not because they try to force you to, but because you can't help it. That is the energy of someone who has learned to stand alone without feeling empty. Living independently means knowing what matters to you and choosing to live by that even when no one agrees. It doesn't require rebellion. It requires the courage to hold on to personal values, even in the face of doubt, opposition, or abandonment. Independent people don't choose the easy road. They choose the honest one. And truth doesn't need the approval of the majority to be valid. What makes you attractive when you live independently isn't what you show. It's how you no longer need to prove anything. When you stop chasing comparisons, when you no longer need to be better than anyone, when you clearly know what you want and don't require applause for it, you free yourself from the invisible pressure that most people carry every day, and you begin to radiate a distinct kind of energy. Calm, and calmness is the highest expression of inner power. Living independently doesn't mean you don't need anyone. On the contrary, because you know how to stand on your own, you're able to build healthier, kinder, and more respectful relationships. You don't come to others to be filled, you connect out of choice, and that makes you deeply trustworthy. You never have to wonder whether they're with you out of lack or sincerity. They were whole before you came, so their presence is a gift, not a cry for help. If you've ever felt too dependent on other people's emotions, if you've ever felt restless when someone didn't respond, or if you felt lost when no one acknowledged your efforts, that's not wrong. It's a sign you've been living through others' eyes, and it's time to reclaim that power. Start by asking what seems like a simple question: what am I living for? For the truth within me, or for the image I want others to see? When you live independently, you can quietly step away from meaningless conversations without guilt. You can decline invitations that go against your values without needing an excuse. You can sit alone in your favorite cafe, reading a book you love without feeling the need to post a photo or share it with anyone, not because you're distant, but because you found the safest place of all, within yourself. And someone who can find peace within will never be lost in the world. An independent person knows how to spend time alone, not because they're lonely, but because they understand that in that stillness they see themselves most clearly. Thoughts undisturbed by noise, values unblurred by others, decisions made without advice, all of it formed in that space. And from there you stop living on autopilot and start living with intention, with discernment, with direction. The world doesn't need you to shout that you're strong. It only needs to feel your consistency. Every choice you make, every word you speak, every step you take is sending a message. When you live independently, that message is, I don't need agreement to exist. And strangely enough, that's when respect begins to flow in. Not because you demanded it, but because you've become someone who cannot be manipulated. If you want to build the most sustainable form of magnetism, not from appearance, not from social skills, but from essence, start by practicing independence. You don't have to leave anyone. You don't have to reject the world. You only need to take one step back from the need to be approved by others. Start making decisions without asking, what will people think? Walk the paths you know are right, even when no one's cheering. And learn to sit still in silence and still feel complete. True magnetism doesn't lie in how well you impress, but in whether you still need to impress at all. When you live independently, you begin to show up in a very different way. No more expecting, no more forcing, only a quiet, grounded presence. And in this noisy world, someone like that doesn't have to do anything. And still, people cannot look away. There are people who walk into a room and no one notices the sound of their footsteps, yet just minutes later, all eyes seem naturally drawn to them, not because they deliberately try to attract attention, nor because they say anything remarkable, but because they carry something that slows the space down. Elegance. Not the kind of elegance wrapped in expensive clothing or polished speech, but a silent kind of elegance that radiates through the way they stand, the way they move, the way they remain quiet without fading into the background. It's a presence that needs no words, yet carries more influence than any statement. Elegant people are not those striving to be perfect. On the contrary, they are well aware of their limitations and choose to face the world with a composed, clear, and complete demeanor. They don't overpower others to be seen. They don't interrupt to assert their opinions. They don't highlight their intelligence by arguing. And it is precisely this that gives their interactions weight. When they speak, others listen. When they are silent, others still feel something profound in their presence. Elegance doesn't come from outward things. It is formed from within, from self-possession. When you are aware of what you're doing, you don't need to rush. When you no longer need to prove anything, you begin to show up more authentically, more fully, and without creating unnecessary disruptions. An elegant person enters a conversation not to compete, but to observe. Not because they lack conviction, but because they know when to speak. They are economical with words, but every word they speak carries depth and clarity. You can recognize them by the way they stand, upright but not tense. Their gaze direct but not harsh. Their voice clear but never loud. They don't overdo things. They don't perform. They're not the type to use flair to cover something up inside. On the contrary, simplicity is how they hold themselves. And that makes them stand out without noise. In a world addicted to exaggeration, those who master restraint naturally command caution and respect. I once witnessed a woman at a large event. She didn't speak much, didn't stand at the center, yet every small movement of hers seemed to make those around her adjust. When she listened, the room quieted. When she smiled, the atmosphere softened. When she stood up, the entire table seemed to fall silent for a beat. And I realized this wasn't social power. It was deep presence, a type of elegance that cannot be borrowed or imitated. It is built through years of self-observation, self-discipline, and self-restraint. True elegance begins with how you treat yourself. When you demand clarity in your thoughts, tidiness in your lifestyle, kindness in your reactions, you are forming a silent language. Others see it in the way you walk, unrushed, unshaken, in the way you listen, without reacting hastily or judging, in the way you show up, not to stand out, but to maintain harmony in the space around you. Elegance does not come from a carefully groomed appearance, but from an inner world that is no longer chaotic. Elegant people don't need to memorize countless rules. They only need to maintain one thing: full presence. When you are truly present, not pulled by anxiety, not pushed by the need to prove, you begin to live slower, steadier, deeper. And from that rhythm, every behavior you express gains more weight. No word is wasted. No gesture is rushed. The person opposite you feels safer, more open, because you are creating space, not invading it. If you're looking for a way to become more magnetic without changing your personality, start by refining your presence. Notice how you sit when no one is watching. Listen to yourself when you react in emotionally charged conversations. Pay attention to how you enter a room. Do you carry urgency or do you bring calm? Train your body to remain composed even when chaos surrounds you. Train your voice not to rise for attention, but to speak clearly enough for others to want to pause. Elegance is when you don't need to outshine anyone, you just don't lose control of yourself. It's when you don't have to say the most correct thing, you say it at the right moment. It's when you choose silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because you know some things carry more weight when left unsaid. Elegant people always know when to step back and when to step forward, not because they are calculating, but because they've learned to listen to the rhythm within themselves and of the space around them. Your presence can say so much on your behalf. And when that presence is built on self-control, observation, and restraint, you no longer need to try to impress. You will find yourself being heard before you speak, respected before you prove anything, remembered without trying to leave a mark. Because you are not performing, you are living in alignment with the most refined and grounded version of yourself. And in a world obsessed with chasing the spotlight, the person who moves in dignified silence is the one who makes others pause and recalibrate. That is the power of elegance in every gesture, a language without words that only those with depth can express. And when you live with that language long enough, you won't need to say much, because your presence will speak for it all. There are people who enter a space and leave a more lasting impression than those who have spoken at length, not because they possess a dazzling appearance or extraordinary stories, but because they plant a small, subtle, unforgettable imprint, a scent, something you can't see but can clearly feel, something not too strong, not too sharp, but just enough to make someone turn back for a second. It's not just about perfume. It's the most delicate message you can send to the world without saying a word. I care about myself, about how you feel, and even about the smallest details. Fragrance is not a luxury. It's a part of your identity. It doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need to stand out. It only needs to be right. Right for your essence, right for the simplicity you want to maintain, right for the quiet message you wish to convey. A fleeting scent can say, you pay attention to yourself, you have a personal sense of aesthetics, you are refined enough to even consider the atmosphere when you step into a room. And in a world moving ever faster, refinement has become a rare and unique form of magnetism. I've always believed that finesse begins with things no one sees. It's when you keep your body clean, not because someone's meeting you today, but because you feel lighter being in a good state. It's when you straighten your collar before stepping out, not to impress anyone, but because you want to show up as someone in order. It's when you choose a subtle scent over an overpowering one, because you understand that silence can be more pleasant than showiness. These small details say more about you than any lengthy introduction ever could. Finesse is not an elaborate effort to appear perfect. It's how you respect others by first respecting yourself. A refined person is not someone who always dresses the best, speaks the best, or shows up on cue. They are someone who makes you feel at ease even when they say nothing. Because from their breath, their neatness, the way they sit or shake hands, every gesture sends a clear message. They didn't come to perform, but to be present. And they don't take their presence lightly. When you care for yourself in the small things, your body scent, your breath, your tidy hair, your well-kept skin, you are telling the world you have discipline. Not discipline for show, but discipline to maintain inner stability. People who are stable always bring a sense of ease. You won't find them fidgeting in a crowd. They know how to walk, how to sit, how to stay calm, no matter how noisy the room is. And outward finesse is merely the surface expression of that inner strength. I once asked a man who always earned respect without saying much, "What do you do to create that kind of magnetism without needing to speak a lot?" He simply smiled and replied, "I never allow myself to show up in a careless state." A simple answer, but behind it lies a clear life philosophy. No one knows how you take care of yourself during the unseen hours. But those hours determine how people feel about you when you appear. The person who doesn't let themselves slip into neglect when alone will never worry about losing composure in front of others. A delicate scent can turn a stranger into someone unforgettable. But if you look deeper, you'll see that fragrance is only the surface. The essence lies in refinement, self-respect, and intentional choices in every detail. Those who choose a gentle fragrance often know how to speak without overpowering others. Those who keep themselves clean and tidy are usually also those who keep their promises. Those who pay attention to appearance, not to stand out, but because they refuse to let carelessness dull their true presence. We don't need to chase a glamorous appearance. But you can't deny first impressions are powerful, and they're not created through expensive things, but through how others feel when you enter their space. Do they feel lighter, more at ease, more assured, or does the air sink, become heavy due to negligence in posture, words, or simply an unkempt scent? A person with quiet magnetism leaves behind a pleasant aftertaste, not dazzling, not clingy, but lingering long after they've gone. If you want to build an image that needs no justification, start with the things others don't pay attention to. Clean your body not just with water, but by removing carelessness in your way of life. Choose a scent not just to please others, but to remind yourself, I deserve to be cherished every day. Maintain finesse in your clothes, your hands, your shoes. That's how you say to the world, I didn't come to flaunt, but I didn't come to be overlooked either. A magnetic person isn't someone who has more than others. They're someone who does well the things others consider minor. And that careful attention is what makes them stand out, not in a way that screams for attention, but in a way that earns trust, invites closeness, and sparks curiosity. They don't say, look at me. They say through presence and the tiniest details, I respect you because first I've learned to respect myself. And that is the most powerful fragrance you can leave behind, a silent, unpretentious aura strong enough to make the world turn its head. There's something that seems simple yet has become increasingly rare in the modern world, true presence. Most people are physically present. They sit in front of you, they nod, they smile, but their minds are drifting elsewhere. Their eyes don't truly see you. Their attention is fragmented by phones, worries, or their own inner thoughts. And so they are there, but not truly present. You feel it clearly, even if you can't put it into words. And you'll also notice something equally clear. When someone is truly present, you immediately feel seen, heard, and valued. That presence carries a special kind of magnetism, not loud, not effortful, but one that touches the emotions of the person in front of them. A good listener doesn't just use their ears. They use their eyes, their well-timed silence, and an unwavering focus. They're not waiting for their turn to speak. They don't interrupt to give an opinion. They're not rushing to fix or explain. They simply listen deeply and patiently. And that act alone, that complete presence, is one of the most attractive qualities a person can carry. Because in a world where everyone wants to speak, be noticed, be heard, the one who steps back to truly receive another's story becomes the most remarkable of all. I've witnessed conversations that seemed quite ordinary, but suddenly became profound simply because one person was fully present. The other person, though saying only a few simple words, felt more important, more clear, and more themselves. Because when someone truly listens to you, you begin to hear yourself more clearly. And that's something no piece of advice or clever statement can create. Only full presence brings about that feeling. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be here, truly here. This kind of presence cannot be faked. The other person will sense immediately if you're only pretending to listen. They'll see your gaze drift, feel your response as mechanical, and they will shut down. But if you are truly present, you don't need to say much. A focused gaze, a gentle nod, or a deep listening silence, the other person will know. They will feel received, they will feel safe, and from there, a connection forms, one that doesn't require showy words or dazzling communication skills. Just you, undistracted, unrushed, uncalculated. Someone who can be fully present also possesses strong inner power, because to truly be present, you must have peace within. You must set aside the urge to perform, to forget personal worries for a moment, and fully focus on another. That requires self-mastery. And the more you practice this, the more you become the kind of person others want to be near. Not because you're overly interesting, but because you make them feel more important simply by being with you. You cannot create true presence if your mind is elsewhere. Ask yourself, when someone is talking to you, what are you thinking about? Are you paying attention to their tone, their eyes, the things left unsaid between the lines? Or are you just waiting for your turn to speak? True presence begins when you set aside the urge to control the conversation and replace it with sincere curiosity. What is this person going through? Do they need to be heard, or do they need to be understood? One of the clearest signs of presence is the ability to sense unspoken emotions. When you're present, you don't just hear words. You hear the pauses between sentences. You catch the silent sigh. You notice the lowered eyes, even when a smile remains on the lips. And that sensitivity makes the other person feel seen, not just on the surface, but deep within. It's a rare kind of care, and it makes you more magnetic than any glamorous exterior ever could. If you're wondering how to cultivate presence, start with the little things. When someone's speaking, put your phone away. Stop planning what you'll say next. Give your full attention to the other person. Their eyes, their body language, the rhythm of their speech. Hold back the instinct to respond right away, and let silence be the proof that you're here. Don't judge, don't fix, just be present. As a friend with an open heart, not a specialist with an analysis. Presence doesn't require you to be perfect. You don't need to answer every question right or always give a profound response. The only thing you need is to stay honest in the moment, and the person in front of you will feel it naturally. They'll know you're not trying to outshine them, not trying to be right. You're simply someone ready to listen, ready to understand. And in a world louder than ever, silent listening is the boldest act a person can perform. We often measure charisma by speech, appearance, social skills. But there is a kind of magnetism that comes from none of those things. It comes from the ability to make someone else feel important, to make them feel fully present in your eyes. And to do that, all you need is to be there, completely, calmly, sincerely, nothing more, nothing less. And that very presence is what makes you unforgettable. Not because you said something impressive, but because you made someone feel they had never been truly listened to before. And when you can do that, you don't just become magnetic, you become a place of grounding. And that is one of the most lasting forms of influence without needing to make a single sound. There's something very few people realize. Not every truth needs to be spoken, and not everything you share makes you more approachable. In a world where everyone is talking about themselves, explaining every choice, every emotion, every detail of their personal life on social media, the person who chooses to keep something for themselves, who doesn't need to bear it all to be understood, becomes more captivating than anyone else. Amid the noise of stories told too early, too much, too freely, A silence that holds secrets becomes rare, precious, and the one who carries that silence is always the one who makes others wonder, what is it about them that I don't yet understand? Mystery is not a game. It doesn't stem from coldness or deliberate distance. It comes from refined discernment, knowing what belongs to yourself, what should be kept to mature, to deepen, and what doesn't need to be exposed in order to be real. Someone who is magnetic isn't so because they tell everything, but because they know when to remain silent. They're not secretive out of fear of being hurt, but because they respect the things that don't yet need to be said. And that very respect makes them stand apart. I once listened to someone who shared very little about their past. No lengthy stories, no emotional accounts, but in every glance, in every pause between sentences, I could feel behind that person were things not easily told. And I didn't feel shut out. I felt invited. Their economy of words didn't make me feel distant. It made me want to listen more carefully, to understand more deeply. That's the effect of mystery. It doesn't create distance. It creates space others want to step into. In how you live, each detail you keep to yourself is a quiet declaration of your inner worth. You don't need everyone to understand you immediately. You don't need everything to be clarified through words. You live with the belief that what's real will be felt. It doesn't need to be explained. And you feel no loss when others don't know everything about you. On the contrary, you feel like you still have something to nurture, to grow, to quietly refine. And that makes you attractive in a lasting way. Not the kind that flares and fades, but the kind that sinks in over time. People with true depth don't reveal everything on the first meeting. They don't recount their entire journey in one conversation. They leave certain details vague, not to hide, but to allow the bond to build slowly, based on understanding, not exposure. And that creates a healthy curiosity. Others are drawn to the undefined, to the unfilled spaces. They sense you have many layers and they want to discover each one, not to possess, but to understand. If you've ever felt pressure to share everything about yourself just so others would see you as real, stop. Ask yourself, am I sharing this from sincerity or from a need to be accepted? Mystery doesn't mean hiding. It means preserving the sacredness of the personal. When you keep a part of yourself unspoken, when you don't rush to share, you don't weaken connection. You invite others to build a relationship based on trust, subtlety, and intentional closeness. And that sets you apart in a world racing to tell all. Keeping mystery is not about building walls. It's how you choose not to let people access you too easily. Not because you're arrogant, but because you understand. Any relationship of real value takes time to build. And if someone is patient enough to keep listening, keep observing, and appreciate even the silences within you, that's the person who deserves to know more. But if they only want to understand quickly, get close quickly, and then forget just as quickly, then your silence is the most respectful refusal you can offer. I believe everyone needs a part of their life that doesn't belong to social media, doesn't belong to storytelling, doesn't belong to anyone but themselves. That is your private inner realm where you speak to yourself, realign yourself, and nurture the parts not yet complete. When you preserve that space intact, you won't be easily swayed by judgment. You'll know who you are, and you won't need anyone else to define that for you. And someone with that kind of self-possession always radiates a presence that makes others pause. If you want to cultivate a healthy sense of mystery, start by sharing fewer unnecessary details. When someone asks you something personal, pause and ask yourself whether you truly want to share or if you're just reacting. Learn to keep something for yourself, not out of fear, but out of respect. Respect for the story, respect for the growth not yet verbalized, and respect for the journey you are quietly walking through each day. Magnetic people don't draw others in because everyone understands them, but because others want to understand them. And that doesn't come from telling detailed stories. It comes from holding on to something deeper, not so others will guess, but so they'll slow down, stay longer, look at you through eyes of patience, curiosity, and respect. And when they do, they change too. They learn not to rush, not to judge, not to label. They learn to listen more. And so your mystery doesn't just make you captivating, it becomes an invitation for others to become deeper themselves. Not everything should be said, because the most beautiful, the deepest, the truest things are sometimes best kept in delicate silence. And the one who can keep that silence is not distant. They are someone who knows that magnetism doesn't lie in exposure, but in the depth you choose to protect. In this hurried world, they are the slow, unforgettable ones. And if you have the courage to hold back just a little, will become one of them too. There are people whose words instantly make you want to hear more. Not because they use flowery language, not because they present themselves as superior, but because everything they say is supported by deep experience and broad understanding. They're not trying to prove anything. They don't need to argue to assert their place. They simply show up with a kind of quiet wisdom that cannot be denied. And that's the power of cultural intelligence. It doesn't need to be flashy to shine. It doesn't need reasoning to win. It only needs to arrive at the right moment with the right depth. Cultural intelligence is not about how many books you've read, how many countries you've visited, or how many languages you speak. It lies in how you approach people, how you listen to differences, how you pass through unfamiliar lands while maintaining full respect for what you don't yet understand. Someone with cultural intelligence doesn't make others feel judged. On the contrary, they make you feel expanded, not through lecturing, but through something awakened within you. I once had a conversation with someone who never mentioned their degrees or international experience, but just a few minutes of listening, and I knew I was sitting with someone seasoned by life. Not because they spoke of great things, but because each question they asked was filled with genuine curiosity. They didn't rush to conclusions. They didn't interrupt to tell a related story. They simply asked, then paused, then continued listening. And from that silence, I felt respected, seen as an individual, not labeled. That is the wisdom of someone who has learned how to understand the world without trying to control it. Those with cultural intelligence don't feel the need to speak all the time. They know when to speak and when silence is the most complete form of presence. They don't use knowledge to overpower, but to support deeper dialogue. They don't force others to listen to them. They make others want to hear more. Their charm doesn't come from domination, but from how they create space for others to be fully themselves and still feel uplifted. That's a rare kind of power, making others feel both comfortable and inspired to become a better version of themselves when they're around you. Cultural intelligence also isn't about knowing everything, but about having the humility to admit that you don't. It's the deep modesty of someone who's seen enough to understand that the world is more complex than any theory can summarize. Such a person doesn't rush to judge, isn't easily swayed by bias, and doesn't use knowledge to declare themselves right. Instead, they maintain flexibility in thought, softness in reception, and clarity in choosing how to respond. If you've ever felt pressure to prove you know something, to speak up just to show you've had experience too, then perhaps you're confusing wisdom with credentials, real understanding with performance. The experience don't need to show off. They don't need to recount everything they've been through. They let their calmness and observant gaze speak for them. They're not the first to speak, but when they do, people pause, not because they're loud, but because they speak from a real place where experiences have been digested, not just recently absorbed. One of the clearest signs of cultural intelligence is the ability to listen without bias. When you can sit across from someone entirely different, maybe from another culture, another class, another belief, and you don't try to fix them, don't try to convert them, just listen to understand. That's when you're living with wisdom, not instinct. And that very acceptance makes you rare, because in a world full of judgment, the person who truly opens their heart carries the most weight in every conversation. You don't need to read every classic book or travel the world to become profound. You only need to learn to see everything through the eyes of someone no longer rushing to conclusions. When someone shares a viewpoint, ask yourself, what made them think that way? When you encounter a situation that contradicts what you believe to be true, pause instead of reacting. Observe whether there's a perspective you haven't considered, and if there is, learn to smile at the incompleteness of your own understanding. That's the first step of someone who truly has depth. Cultural intelligence doesn't make you talkative, it makes you discerning. You understand that not everything needs to be said, not every place needs to be taught a lesson, not every story needs to be told to assert your place. You speak less, but each word carries weight, and that earns respect, not because you're the smartest in the room, but because you're the one who makes the other smart people want to listen more. If you want to become more magnetic without changing who you are, start by developing a quiet understanding. Read not to speak knowledgeably, but to create inner calm. Listen not to reply, but to feel what's truly unfolding in the other person's story. Engage with many ways of living, many cultures, many walks of life, not to become versatile, but to lessen the reflex to judge too quickly. Learn to live like the experienced, silently, observantly, selectively, and deeply. You'll find that you don't need to do much to attract others, because real experience, without showing off, always shines on its own. In a world that increasingly values speed, achievement, and cleverness, compassion seems like something outdated and fragile. But it is precisely within this competitive, calculating space that those who hold on to kindness truly stand apart. Not because they're overly gentle or naive, but because they possess a quiet strength. The strength of a heart that can see the pain behind behavior, knows how to step back and listen, and chooses to respond with empathy instead of defensiveness. Kindness is not a fleeting act. It is a quality of presence. And when that presence is sincere, it draws others in without effort. Have you ever met someone whose simple glance, gentle words, or seemingly small gesture made you feel seen, understood, and unjudged? Such people don't need to be eloquent, nor do they try to appear caring. Their attentiveness doesn't come from intellect, but from something deeper. A heart that has learned to be patient with others because it once needed someone to be patient with itself. At its deepest level, kindness is not an action, it is an essence, refined by experience, by surviving loneliness and still choosing to live, by being misunderstood and still choosing not to do the same to others. I once witnessed someone in the middle of a tense meeting choose not to react to a verbal jab, not because they were weak, but because they recognized that the tension in the other person's voice stemmed not from personal animosity, but from a quiet fear. They didn't rush to retaliate. They didn't seek to clarify. They simply let silence soften the moment, then asked a gentle question to reopen the door of dialogue. And that kind restraint transformed the entire room. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. Something deeply honorable had just taken place. That silent kindness may not receive immediate praise, but it creates a positive memory that others will never forget. Kind people don't live to please everyone. They know their limits, they know when to say no, and when to remain quiet. But in every decision, they choose to maintain respect for others, even in disagreement. They don't rush to judge someone after hearing only one side. They don't define a person's character by a single mistake. They are more patient, not because they are lenient, but because they understand that every person carries a story we haven't fully heard. And with that understanding, they move at a pace slow enough not to cause unnecessary harm. Kindness doesn't need grand gestures, a timely smile, a simple "I understand" instead of "I told you so," a non-judgmental gaze when someone makes a mistake, a quiet wait when someone isn't ready to open up. All of these, though small, create a clear feeling you are near someone safe. And nothing is more magnetic than safety In a world full of unpredictability, people don't seek perfection, they seek kindness because it makes them feel they are still worthy of love, even when they're not yet their best. If you want to become more magnetic, don't start by trying to be interesting. Start by observing how you respond to others. When someone shares a mistake, do you truly listen, or are you waiting to offer advice? When someone acts unpleasantly, do you quickly label them as negative, or do you wonder what they might have been through that you can't see? When someone behaves unexpectedly, do you get angry, or are you calm enough to ask what could have caused them to act this way? You don't have to speak the answer, but simply asking yourself these questions means you are already practicing kindness, and others will sense it naturally. Kindness is not a sign of weakness. It requires tremendous inner discipline. It's not easy to remain silent when you could lash out. It's not easy to stay calm when you've been misunderstood. It's not easy to stay soft when the world insists you harden. But when you choose that path, the path of compassion, of patience, of non-rushed understanding, you become an anchor. Without saying a word, people will want to be near you. They'll want to keep you close because your presence makes them breathe easier, feel lighter, and believe in humanity again. A kind person doesn't need wide recognition. They don't need to stand out, but wherever they go, they leave a gentle trace. And that trace, that quiet yet persistent warmth, is what makes people remember you for a long time. No need to dominate the space, no need to prove anything. Just keep living in a way that avoids unnecessary harm, that doesn't turn cold in the face of others' pain, and that doesn't abandon goodness even after being hurt. Kindness is a form of magnetism. Not because it makes you instantly noticed, but because it makes others want to keep you in their lives. Not because you're impressive, but because you're warm. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. In an era where everyone is chasing uniqueness, it's sincere kindness, unembellished, unforced, that is most precious. And if you can hold on to that within yourself, don't need to do anything more. Your kindness in itself becomes a presence that makes the world fall quiet for a moment. And sometimes just a few seconds of that is enough for someone to remember you forever. Among the many qualities that make a person attractive, there's one often underestimated, yet capable of creating the most lasting allure: joy. Not the forced kind of cheerfulness used to ease tension, not the loud laughter meant to draw attention, but a quiet, deep joy. One you can feel just by looking at them and suddenly feel a little lighter. Those who carry true joy don't need to tell jokes or be the center of every gathering. Their very presence is enough to lighten a heavy room, to make others breathe more easily. They're the kind of people who walk in and bring sunlight, not blinding, but warm enough that you want to stay close. People who manage to keep a steady sense of joy often haven't had easy lives. They've been through pain. They've touched exhaustion's edge. And precisely because of that, they choose joy not as a reaction, but as a decision. They don't use laughter to avoid real emotions, but as a way to soothe them. They don't deny hardship, but they refuse to let themselves become victims of it. They choose to face life with a gentler, deeper, and kinder gaze. And that's what forms their resilient spirit. Not bitter, not broken, just quietly believing that things will be okay. And that, while waiting for that, one can still smile. I've met people who don't need to tell jokes, yet make others laugh just by the way they see things. The way they describe a failure doesn't make you sad, it makes you feel more at home with your own imperfections. They don't try to impress, they make you feel understood. And through their little stories, their understated smiles, they offer something precious, the feeling of returning to normalcy, of laughing without needing a good reason, of being gentle yet deeply real. True joy doesn't come from having everything perfect. It comes from no longer needing things to be perfect in order to smile. People who possess deep joy are those who accept darkness without letting it consume the light inside them. They can cry the night before and still smile the next morning, not because they've forgotten, but because they understand that emotions are meant to flow, not to be repressed or held onto. And through that flow, they maintain a flexible soul, a kind of strength that is tender yet unbreakable. You don't need to be a motivational speaker to radiate positive energy. You just need to be honest with your emotions, not forcing yourself to be upbeat all the time, but also not sinking into sadness without awareness. Start by noticing the small things that make you smile. The evening sun, a perfectly brewed coffee, a surprise message from an old friend, or simply the ability to take a slow breath after a long day. When you practice recognizing small joys, you begin to change your mental framework from within. You start seeing the world with new eyes, not to deny the negative, but to prevent it from taking over. Someone who can laugh at themselves no longer fears judgment. They see their own awkwardness without shame. They can recount a clumsy moment with a light chuckle, not to blame or mock anyone, but to remind us all we've all been imperfect before, and that ease spreads. People around them feel permission to let go of performances, to make mistakes, to breathe more gently, because the person in front of them isn't demanding perfection, but is inviting sincerity. Real laughter is never shallow. It is the product of a soul that has been through storms and still remains soft enough to see the sadness in beauty and the beauty in sadness. When you laugh, not to hide tears, but to soothe them, you create a profoundly lasting allure. People may not remember exactly what you said, but they will remember the lightness they felt in your presence. And when someone feels they can breathe easier because of you, they'll want to stay close, not because you're entertaining, but because you make them feel more at home in their own skin. If you want to cultivate that quiet magnetism, don't force yourself to always be positive. Instead, learn to look at life fully. See the darkness, but don't stop there. Learn to laugh with yourself daily. Not because everything's fine, but because you choose not to let the unfinished steal your capacity for joy. Remember, you don't need to tell a brilliant story to make someone laugh. Sometimes a soft glance, a sincere question, a natural gesture is enough to open a warm moment. Those with real joy don't laugh to overpower anyone. They laugh because they are no longer ruled by what's not worth it. They've learned to let go, to release at the right time, and not to punish themselves too long over what can't be changed. And when you live that way, you emit a very special kind of energy. Not loud, not demanding, not uncomfortable, but enough to make someone passing by turn and wonder, how can that person be so light? Joy needs no conditions. It only needs your decision that you deserve it, even when things aren't perfect. And laughter, when it comes from your deepest core, won't just brighten your face, but the whole space you enter. No need to raise your voice, no need to seek attention. Just live with the heart that has learned to smile after days when it felt impossible. And someone who carries that kind of light, wherever they go, will always leave behind a trace of sun in others' hearts, soft, true, and unforgivable. People often mistake self-care for self-indulgence, but the truth is the opposite. It's a quiet discipline, one that needs no display, no recognition. It is a daily promise you make to yourself that no matter how chaotic the world becomes, you will still preserve a part of yourself that remains untouched. Self-care isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about living in alignment with the highest standards you expect of yourself. And the person who keeps that promise to themselves radiates a very distinct kind of magnetism, quiet, steady, yet impossible to ignore. I've observed many people who possess a special aura. They don't wear designer clothes, don't have elaborate makeup, don't try to stand out, but every step they take, every glance, every way they show up in a space carries a sense of intention. Not the kind of intention crafted to impress, but a consistency that comes from within. You can feel that they've trained themselves to live by a standard, and they keep it. Not for others, but because their self-respect won't allow carelessness. And that's what makes it impossible to overlook them, even though they never ask to be seen. Self-care doesn't begin in the gym or with expensive cosmetics. It begins with how you talk to yourself in the morning, whether you choose to skip a meal or not, whether you hit snooze or get out of bed on time, whether you push yourself to keep tolerating what isn't right for you, or finally gather the courage to say no. These small decisions, repeated daily, form the core of who you are. And when you take these small things seriously, you begin to walk with a confidence that needs no validation. Others will feel it, even if they can't put it into words. People who know how to care for themselves are not people with too much free time or nothing more important to do. They're as busy as everyone else, but they understand that if they collapse, everything else collapses with them. So they prioritize their health, not out of fear, but because they want to have enough energy to live a full life. They eat selectively, not from vanity, but because they refuse to let their bodies be filled with things of little value. They rest when needed, not from laziness, but because they refuse to sacrifice their clarity just to keep up with a frantic pace. Someone once asked me, how do I look more valuable in other people's eyes? I answered, start by living as if you already are. No one can believe you're worthy if you're still treating yourself like you're not. No one will respect you if you don't uphold even the basic principles for your own body, mind, and emotions. You don't need to be extravagant. You just need to do one simple thing. Don't abandon yourself. Don't let yourself become a prisoner to schedules, expectations, or long accumulated fatigue. Create a space, even a small one, each day where you return to being your own best friend. I believe that those who carry lasting magnetism are not the perfect ones, but those who have enough self-respect not to let themselves go. They know their limits and they don't allow anyone, not even themselves, to cross those boundaries carelessly. They know when to rest, when to say no, when to walk away from a relationship or environment that's eroding their well-being. They don't wait until their body alarms, their mind unravels, or their emotions explode to return to self-care. They proactively maintain their inner stability so they don't have to heal from burnout, but can instead live with consistent quality every single day. You can start with simple things, a full night's sleep, a decent meal, tidying up your living space, a new habit you've long known you should start but kept postponing. No need to become an idealized version of yourself. Just do enough that you feel like you've returned to the center of your own life. Every time you prioritize yourself in the right way, you send a signal to the world, I am important enough to be treated well. And the miraculous thing is, the world will start to treat you that way too. Self-care is not about leveling up. It's not a tool to attract others. It is an act to preserve your self-respect. When you stand before the mirror and see someone with clear eyes, a calm gait, a steady breath, you know you're okay. Not because you look good, but because you're present. And those who are present with themselves are always the ones others want to be near. Because they don't need to be filled. They come to others not from lack, but from fullness. And that fullness brings a sense of safety, trust, and ease, things you can't learn from social skills or short-term impressions. If you're looking to become more magnetic, don't rush to learn how to speak or dress better. Start by observing how you care for yourself. Are you sleeping enough? Do you eat in a way that honors your body? Do you often spend time with those who ease your spirit, or do you stay surrounded by what drains you? Do you listen to your emotions, or do you simply push through another day? These questions may seem trivial, but they are the most honest measurement of how much value you place on yourself. And when you adjust that from the root, you'll be surprised how others start to see you differently, not because your appearance changed, but because you began to emit a different kind of energy. The energy of someone who respects themselves. Self-respect doesn't need to be spoken. You don't need to post pictures of your workouts. Don't need to tell anyone what you've read. Don't need to explain your eating or sleep routine. You just need to live with quiet consistency. I will not abandon myself, no matter how busy I get, no matter how disappointed I feel. And when you can live that way, you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. Your consistent presence, your steady care, your grounded daily choices, these will make you the kind of person everyone respects, even if they can't explain exactly why. That is the art of self-care, a quiet yet irreplaceable art. Practiced by those who understand this, magnetism begins within, And self-respect is the strongest foundation of any lasting beauty.